Welcome again to my artistic space, the Église Sainte-Thérèse in Hirson. Today I would like to share some thoughts about a program which may seem quite unusual at first glance. It is a combination of compositions by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and Franz Liszt, two composers which may seem to have nothing to do with each other and really would not go together. It is not, however, a program that is taking the normal works of these two composers and trying to show some kinship which does not exist. Actually, while looking at some more unknown works of these composers, I felt a very striking thing, a kind of message which I thought would be very interesting to elaborate further and to present in a program. You see, these are both composers which one associates rightly with a certain kind of style, and they were, in a sense, the greatest exponents of that style. Mozart's style is now called the classical, and his music is sort of the greatest example when we think of a certain, let's say, highest point or highest period of refinement of a certain development. And really the same with Liszt, that he really embodies the romantic spirit in music, and that his way of thinking, the way that he develops a piece, is simply typical of this kind of aesthetic. But actually, these composers did much more than that, and this is to be found in some pieces which we could say show the weird Mozart or the weird Liszt. So what brought me to bring these two things together in a program is the feeling that I had while looking at this music, that there was a kind of appeal to transcendence going on in both of these developments, which actually historically had very little to do with each other, with one exception, which I will get to. So I chose some pieces by Mozart which are, well, not the sonatas, not the concertos, but a product of his association with Baroque music. It seems to me that he saw in the old music, that is in music which was before his time, a kind of timelessness which he then tried to appropriate to his own way of using musical language. And, well, he did not leave behind so many pieces of this kind of inspiration, but those that he did are all very interesting and very much different. The last one is the F minor fantasy for mechanical organ, where one could say that the fact that he writes for a mechanical instrument is actually not only for technical reasons. It is clear that the manual piano technique of the time could not have coped with this piece, but also the idea that when something is being expressed by a machine, that it becomes, or that it starts to live on a different level that is independent of the individual expression or of the moment of interpretation. And, well, I would like to give an example from the middle section of this fantasy, which is this kind of celestial beauty, which I think is a hallmark of this development that Mozart underwent when he started this kind of appeal to transcendence, which of course was always latent in his music, and it was up to the composer actually to interpret these classical formulae in such a way that they became transcendent. characterized by harmonies which did not make sense in the framework of how one would normally analyze music of the first part of the 19th century. But this is, in my opinion, only one side of the perspective that is required for one to understand and get into the world of Liszt's late music. I mean, it's a very personal way of speaking, and it was much more reduced than when he was writing the, let's say, typical Lisztian things. And one thing which I think is particularly moving about this music, which one could say is at the base depressive. I mean, it's a music which, to use the phrase of Erwin Nyíregyházy, is there to express the drama and the sorrow of life. But it is not only that, and the moments where it looks up with a smile and basically admits the existence of something perfectly beautiful, is for me something that is very distinctive in this late style of Liszt. And this is one of the things that I find almost in common with Mozart's late style. If one looks at the piece, En Rêve, the major chord is, of course, something which always exists. It doesn't necessarily have a meaning, but when it's put in such a context with such an emotional atmosphere, then one has to think that there is a world which the composer believes to see before his own eyes, in which the major chord is the symbol of the perfect harmony and of the transcendence. So in this program, I'm using this as a kind of starting point to explore kinship of souls. This kinship actually has one anecdote, which is a concrete common point. The late piece of Mozart for chorus, the Ave Verum Corpus, was transcribed by Liszt for solo piano in his late years. And this is a kind of marriage of the late Mozart style with many of its typical elements, and the late Liszt style. And it is said that Liszt thought that the closing sequence of the Ave Verum Corpus was one of the particularly beautiful things in music. I must say that this is a phrase which could have been written by Mozart in his late years or by Liszt in his late years. Well, so it is a music which I must say is not the most accessible, because it is not a kind of positive paradigm that makes it possible for one to understand the structure and then to simply enjoy creativity within this structure. This is music which is taking elements from the whole of experience, from the whole of history of the literature, to make something which is essentially a personal statement.